Haunted, An American Tale is a newly commissioned theatrical work that recounts the roots and of hatred and fear embedded in the story of the 1898 lynching of Manly Macaulay in Orange County. It also tracks the roots of racialized violence in America as manifested in the colonial justice or injustice system, the Wilmington Massacre of 1898, and the recent murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. This afternoon, Sonny Kelly will bring to life the voices of historians, ancestors, elders, youth, politicians, pundits, and poets as he traces the roots of modern-day anti-Black violence in America. I am Renee Price, Chair of the Orange County Board of County Commissioners, and on behalf of the production crew and sponsors, thank you for being here. Our sponsors for this production include the Orange County Arts Commission, the ArtsCenter, Free Spirit Freedom, the North Carolina Arts Council, and the Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition. Haunted, in fact, is part of a series of events by the coalition whose work is inspired by the Equal Justice Initiative, or EJI, of Montgomery, Alabama. EJI has embarked on a multi-year project to recognize the victims and survivors of racial terror lynching from 1877 to 1950. To date, they have documented over 4,400 incidences of racial terror lynching in the United States during that period, and of that number, over 119 occurred in North Carolina. Our coalition seeks to recognize local victims of racial terror lynching, and in so doing is working to disrupt and overcome the detrimental systems and mindsets that have plagued America for generations. Regarding the star of the show, Sonny Kelly, he is a performer, storyteller, playwright, motivator, and comedian. He has acted professionally on stage and in television for over 20 years, and in 2020 earned a PhD in Communication and Performance Studies from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. With Haunted, Kelly will uncover or unbury the true story, the oft-times brutally honest history of the United States of America. For with these truths, we will persist in our fight for humanity, freedom, and justice. As you are watching, please feel free to type your questions in the comments section on your screen, and Dr. Kelly will respond after the performance. And now, I am pleased to present to you, on stage, Dr. Sonny Kelly in Haunted, An American Tale, with assistance from Liz Grimes, lighting designer, Michael Betts II, sound designer, Thomas Mauney, assistant lighting designer, Jarek Mack, technical director, Ramey Mack, video technician, and Elena Kelly and Brenton Harrison performing the vocals. Thank you.
Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Oh, that strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and twisted mouth, the scent of magnolias, sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to dry out. Here is a strange and bitter crowd. As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way when you shall wear the starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. Oh, brother, let's go down, let's go down, let's go down. Oh, sister, let's go down, down in the river to pray. As I went down in the valley to pray, studying about that good old way when you shall wear starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. Oh, mourner, let's go down, let's go down, let's go down. Oh, mourner, let's go down, down in the valley to pray. As I went down in the valley to pray, studying about that good old way when you shall wear the starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. By and by we'll all go down, all go down, all go down. By and by we'll all go down, down in the valley to pray.
6 humans trapped by happenstance in bleak and bitter cold. Each possessed a stick of wood, or so the story's told. The fire dying in need of logs, the first one held his back, for of the faces round the fire he noticed one was black. The next man, looking across the way, saw one not from his church and couldn't bring himself to give the fire his stick of birch. The poor man gave his coat a hit. Why should his log be put to use to warm the idle rich? The rich man sat back and thought of all the wealth he had in store and how to keep what he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. The black man's face bespoke revenge as the fire passed from his sight. See, all he saw in his stick of wood was a chance to spite the white. The next man of this forlorn group gave not except for gain. Giving only to those who gave was how he played the game. Each held his log in death's still hands as proof of human sin. They didn't die from the cold without. They died from the cold within. James Patrick Kinney wrote that. About 100 years ago, a man named Langston Hughes wrote a poem called I Too. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes, and nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. Why did he do that, Daddy? I don't know, son. I think maybe he was very sad or angry. But why was he so sad or angry? I don't know. Maybe he had mental illness. You know, maybe he's sick in his head. Plus, you know, the people in that church, they're different from him. They're not different from him. They're people, and he's people. No, son, it's a black church. They were all black, and he's white. It's Wednesday, June 17th, 2015, at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, known as Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, for centuries, Mother Emanuel has been a bastion for the black community. It's a place where abolitionists and captives, where civil rights leaders and volunteers have met to plan revolts, uprisings, rallies, and revivals. In fact, in the summer of 1822, Mother Emanuel was burned to the ground by some angry white folks who learned that a slave revolt was being planned from its very pews. But this night is just a typical Wednesday night Bible study. Pastor Clementa C. Pinckney is leading a Bible study for 11 members of the church and one unexpected guest. Now, all 11 members are black people. The one unexpected guest is a 21-year-old white supremacist named Dylan Storm Roof. Now, the name Dylan is Welsh. It means son of the sea or son of the wave. So as the members of Mother Emanuel bow their heads in solemn prayer, Dylan Storm lifts his. This angry son of the South rises up in this seaside church house with the .45 caliber pistol in hand and rains down a storm of bullets upon the members of Mother Emanuel. Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Cynthia Marie Graham Hurd, Susie J. Jackson, Ethel Lee Lance, DePayne Middleton Doctor, Clementa Carlos Pinckney, Daniel Lee Simmons, Myra Thompson, my sons are 7 and 4 when this happens. But Daddy, he didn't have to be scared of them. They were just praying. You don't have to be scared of people when they pray. You're right, son, but, well, some people, you know, they just hate people. And so you got to be careful. Okay, you always got to be careful. But why? But why what? Why do people hate people? And why do we have to be careful? I don't know, son, because they do, okay? Because I said so, okay? Because I said so. Okay. I knew why. I knew exactly why. It was because of blackness. There. I said it. It was because of blackness, or whatever we've made of blackness. Blackness is a thing of no real substance, yet it weighs upon my existence in the most precarious of ways. It is laden with stigma. Some say it's just a figment of imagination these days. Some days I'd like to believe them. Erase it all and relieve them of the guilt and the shame and the sorrow and the pain. But blackness is not going anywhere. My blackness is always right there. With me, without me, around me, about me. Pressed down on my shoulders, pressed down from the ancestors, a mantle so dark, yet lighter than air. At times I lose sight of it and forget that it's there, but I can always feel it. It reframes my anger into bestial rage. It reclaims my protest as riots on the newspaper page. It looms with expectations that color my core. It rises like a specter when I enter a store, or when I wear a hoodie on the street, or when I forget my receipt, when I fail to keep a smile on my face, when I'm in an uncomfortable place, where I'm the only one not seen as a native son, when I forget to pay a debt, or that my body is a threat to some and a target to others. Right before Dylan Roof opened fire on him, 26-year-old Tywanza Sanders asked Dylan, "Why are you doing this?" "I have to do it. You rape our women, and you're taking over our country, and you have to go."
Beautiful light, come where the dewdrops of mercy shine bright, shine all around us by day and by night. Jesus, the light of the world.
The ghost of blackness that haunted him. It haunts me too. It haunts my walk and my talk. It haunts my conversations with my kids. If we're being honest, it haunts every one of us. It has for quite some time now. Tuesday, October 22nd, 1898, a Negro rapist and a Negro seducer hanged. It is a fact not generally known that there have been 2 lynchings in North Carolina within the past 2 weeks. The victims in both cases were Negroes, and their crime practically the same. The first one was Manly McCauley near Chapel Hill, North Carolina, on Friday night, October 28th. On Wednesday afternoon, October 26th, Mrs. Milton Brewer, wife of a substantial farmer in Orange County, eloped from the home of her husband 4 miles west of Chapel Hill with Manly McCauley, a young Negro, 18 years old. On Friday, a posse of 18 men, headed by the husband of the woman, overtook the elopers just beyond Jonesboro and took them into custody. The Negro was taken part of the distance back to Chapel Hill, but disappeared.
In the southern breeze, all that strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees.
Back in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote called The Souls of Black Folk. And in it, he reflects upon the experiences of black Americans in this great nation. One ever feels his two-ness. An American, a Negro. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings in one body. This story is not for the faint of heart. This fateful junction, handsome, strapping young American was confronted with the jarring juxtaposition of his manhood and his blackness. Confronted with a group of his own countrymen who were determined to destroy both. To Mary McCullough, here. Yeah! No, I got 1 minute. To dark liquor and white women. Too soon? I'm sorry. I apologize. I don't mean no offense. I know we in mixed company. beg to differ. I know exactly my place. They the ones who forgot. My bloodline goes back for generations in this country. A lot of folks don't like that about me. Now, I know I done made a lot of folks very angry. And I understand why. I betrayed my boss, ran away with a married woman, a married white woman. They say I crossed the county line and the color line all in the same day. And it has been here for longer than anyone in this space can remember. And it will continue to grow for as long as we can imagine, I suppose. But I must warn you, it is a haunted tree. Running through my natural born vein, just running and running so fast and so hard. Sometimes I feel like my blood could boil. Can you feel it? To help me tell this story tonight, I brought along my ancestors. Yeah, my white grandpats who boldly stood up against British tyranny and northern aggression, who publicly poured tea in the sea and privately forced their bodily affection on my black and native grandmans. My black grands who survived the Middle Passage, whose dignity and wisdom defied the countless lashes. My indigenous American grands who honored the land and the gift of life till uninvited guests changed the plan with theft and strife. My African, European, and indigenous ancestors who were killing, oppressing, and enslaving one another long before their paths ever collided with each other. I am the embodiment of our forefathers' commitment to these self-evident truths that all men are created equal. Only they didn't mean all men or any women before the amended sequel. Once alienated from my own unalienable rights, here I stand, a product of my ancestors' struggles and plights. From indentured servitude to the expanding frontier, from chattel slavery to the trail of tears, you see, they live in me. It's like Sister Maya Angelou said, as she raved, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I am. We are the dream and the hope of our ancestors. Yours and mine. Yeah. And see, before all the division and derision, every one of us came from mutual ancestors somewhere far east of here, in or near what we today know as Africa. So as strange as it may seem, and as difficult as it may be to see, every one of us is just an apple fallen from the same family tree. The same haunted tree. Only some of us, like Manley and Macaulay and me, just happen to be of a slightly darker hue than others. And in the words of the great William Shakespeare, there's the rub. Tuesday, November 8, 1898. The Negro is dead. That a white woman would stoop so low as to elope with a Negro seems impossible. But this woman was born of a family who winked at social equality and thought that the day when the white man and the Negro would be socially equal was not far distant. She married a man who entertained the same views, and they lived happily together until one day when the man came home to find his wife had eloped with his Negro farmhand. founded, you know. Man, found him hanging from a dogwood tree. Historians have placed this particular dogwood tree at the modern-day intersection of Old Greensboro Road and Hatch Road, right there in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Makes you wonder what his last words were, you know? Did he apologize? Mr. Gruber, it ain't what it looked like. Mr. Gruber, I'm so sorry. Maybe he begged. Mr. Brewer, please. Mr. Brewer, don't put that thing on me. Don't put that insert. Please, Mr. Brewer, I don't want to die. Please. I want to die. Please, sir. Maybe he stood strong and faced it down. You know, like he knew it was coming. Like that great poet Claude McKay said, if we must die, let it not be like hogs hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making a mock of our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die. Like men, we will face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back. We can only imagine. What we do know is that man in Carly was left. What most folks don't know is that lynching has a very complicated history in this country. According to Merriam-Webster, the word lynching means to put to death by mob violence without legal permission or approval. Now, what many people forget is that early America was extremely, unbelievably violent by today's standards. And for a while there, lynching had nothing to do with race or racism. It was mostly white folks who lynching white folks. In fact, some historians trace back the lynch law to the Revolutionary period when the colonists were persecuting the Tories or the British sympathizers. During that time, there was a judge, a Revolutionary Justice of the Peace. His name was Charles Lynch. That's where the term lynch law came from. Charles Lynch would have British sympathizers beaten, tarred and feathered, even hung from trees. And don't you get me started on the Salem witch trials or the Wild West. Now, for a while there, it seemed like white folks was lynching white folks for general principle. But then, something happened. As law and order blossomed in the land, violent roots thirsted for blood, and blackness rose to the occasion. See, by the mid-1960s, once slavery had taken its boot off the black man's neck, the black man had the noose of lynching placed around it. See, while white folks had new human rights like speedy trials and juries of their peers, and innocence until proven guilty, black folks and non-whites were not afforded such luxuries. Soon, the number of white folks being lynched decreased as the number of black folks being lynched increased.
Past old scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and twisted mouth.
Lynching became an expected end for any black person who was deemed too uppity in the face of white authority, too persnickety when offered white generosity, or too flirty when in the presence of white femininity. Take, for example, Wright Woods, Little River, North Carolina. On a Sunday, the 12th of September, 1869. Wright Woods was a young man who was accused of making untoward remarks to a white girl in his community. Before the sun could set, 4 angry white men pulled that boy out of a coal kiln where he was working with his daddy. White went missing for about a week before a neighbor noticed a gathering of vultures in a field and found his body there with a note attached to his foot. Said, if the law will not protect virtue, the rope will. Then there was Cyrus Guy out in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Sunday, December 13th, 1869. A nigger named Cyrus Guy was found near the county line last week, hanging to a tree, dead. Attached to his person was a piece of paper written, for insulting white ladies. That note was written in Cyrus's own blood.
The scent of magnolias, sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh.
As strange as it sounds, in many white communities, lynching a black person became as innocent and commonplace as a community watch patrol meeting or a block party, or both. Claude McKay described it like this. Day dawned, and soon the mixed crowds came to view the ghastly bodies swaying in the sun. Women thronged to look, but never one showed sorrow in her eyes of steely blue. And little lads, little lynches that were to be, danced round the dreadful thing in fiendish glee. I suppose blackness has haunted us all in some strange ways over the years.
As I went down in the valley to pray, studying about that good old way when you shall wear starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. Oh, mourner, let's go down, let's go down, let's go down. Oh, mourner, let's go down, down in the valley to pray.
This confusing concoction of colorized social construction that we call blackness began long before lynching or what you and I know as America even existed. To get to the root of the matter, we got to go back in history a couple of hundred years, to the mid-15th century, when European explorers headed by the Portuguese crown and Prince Henry started exploring, discovering, and colonizing parts of Africa. Now, they had three goals: to procure riches, find new trade routes, and to spread Christianity throughout the world. Now, as they became more and more successful, their influence and affluence expanded, and they had another goal: to find cheap labor. Many hands make light the work when you're building a global empire. So, led by the Prince Henry of Portugal, the European countries started funding voyages across the Atlantic to the western part of Africa. And in doing so, they created a new type of slavery. It appointed and evaded already successful Islamic slave trade routes. And it all hinged on this new catchy phrase, oh no, the black. Prince Henry's biographer, Gomez Eanes de Surada, wrote it all down in the Chronicles back in 1435. Very early in the morning, by reason of the heat, the seamen made ready their boats, and they took out the captives and carried them to the shore as they were ordered. And all of these placed in the field were a marvelous sight, as black as Ethiops, and so ugly in features and in body. Now, to Surada, Prince Henry, and other Europeans, blackness was not just skin tone; it was deeper. It was a condition of the soul. Before they had lived as in condition of their soul and body, of their soul in that they were yet pagans, without the clearness and light of the holy faith. Of their bodies in that they lived like beasts, with no custom of reasonable being. They had no understanding of good, but only lived in a bestial sloth. Surara, Prince Henry, and these other explorers were all devout Christians, which begs the question, how does a Christian nation, a religion that's based upon a humble Jewish man named Jesus of Nazareth, who taught his followers to love their neighbors as themselves, how do believers in that man and that religion, how do they justify the oppression, enslavement, and torture of their neighbor? That's easy. They blame it on God. X marks the spot. Open your Bibles, please, to Genesis chapter 9. We're going to meet a young man named Noah. Noah was God's man for the hour. You might say he was God's first round pick. This ace boom cool. Noah was a good man. Noah was a righteous man. And when God decided to smite the earth, to destroy it with a flood of floods, he saved Noah and his family. He had Noah build an ark. All the animals on the ark. Put his family on the ark. And it rained for 40 days. I said it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. And when that water receded, God, being a God of his promise, he gave Noah a new beginning. And Noah stepped out that ark, and he started a new beginning. I said a new beginning. He got a new job. He became a farmer, started growing grapes of the vine. And you know, from grapes, you get that new wine. That's right. He had that new wine. Well, Noah got a little happy with his wine, the fruit of his vine one day. He drank too much, got drunk, butt-ball naked in his tent, fell out cold. Noah's son Ham, his baby boy Ham. I said his baby boy Ham came and found his daddy all compromised in the tent, naked, drunk, and knocked out. And Ham didn't know what to do. So what did Ham do, brothers and sisters? Ham went and got his big brother big brother Shem and Japheth. He said, Shem, he said, Japheth, daddy's drunk, butt-ball naked in the tent. I don't know what to do. But Shem and Japheth was wise like their daddy. They was honorable. They took a big cloth, put it over Noah's body, and covered it, and didn't even look to preserve his honor. Well, when Noah woke up, I said when Noah woke up, what's done in the dark is going to come out in the light. Noah realized he had been bamboozled, run amok. I said, led astray by his youngest son Ham. He left him uncovered, left him uncouth, unkempt, uncared for. So what did Noah do? Noah cursed that boy and all his descendants. A servant of servants you shall be unto your brethren. Can I get an amen? So who, might you ask, became the descendants of Ham? Those people who were cursed to be servants of servants to their brethren. Well, in 1578, British travel writer and voyager George Best came up with, well, let's just say a very convenient answer that the Europeans were glad to receive. It is God's will that Ham's son and all his posterity should be so black and loathsome as to remain a spectacle for all the world, a spectacle of disobedience. So, if black people were the sons of Ham and were cursed to be servants, but it was only the Christian thing to do to put them to work, right? Idle hands are the devil's workshop. Into that fateful year, sorry all my history teachers, 1619. Let's get into it. In that summer, August of 1619, a private British ship sails into Port Comfort and drops its anchor in the James River, right near the Jamestown colony of Virginia. On that ship, according to the manifest, we know that there were 20 and odd Africans on board. Now, we don't know much more about these precious sons and daughters of Ham, but we do know that some, if not all of them, were considered indentured servants. Now, all of this takes a turn for the worse in 1640, when an African indentured servant named John Punch decides to collude with two of his other indentured servants, a Dutchman named Victor and a Scotchman named James Gregory. These three men, in their mutual pursuit of freedom, create a sort of rainbow coalition of runaways. And so, I imagine John Punch probably came to his buddies like this. Brothers, listen. Brothers, we are men, huh? You win our master. He is the worst, though. He does not treat us like men. He treats us like slaves, huh? We are men. Let us go into the woods and be free. And then I imagine Victor the Dutchman says something like, oh, Dan, that's kind of scary. But it is hot here. It never gets this hot and hot, and then the food is bad, and the work is hard, and I hate you, Gwen. Okay, let's go. And then the Scotsman, James Gregory, he probably says something like, fellas, I can hardly understand the word you're saying with your strange accents and such. But if you two boys need to run away, then I'm with you. A Scotsman is born with a free spirit in his soul, and it must be unleashed on the world. Let's go! Or something like that. So they all run away into the woods, and they escape and make it as far as Maryland. Only problem is, Hugh Gwynn is hit to the game. He sends out slave catchers, catches all three of them, brings them back to the colonial court. Whereas Hugh Gwynn hath by order of this board brought back from Maryland 3 servants formerly run away from the said Gwynn. This court doth therefore order that the said 3 servants shall receive a punishment of whipping, and to have 30 stripes apiece. The one called Victor, a Dutchman, and the other a Scotsman, James Gregory, shall serve out the times with their master according to their indentures. And that the third, being a Negro named John Punch, shall serve his master or his assigns for the time of his natural life, here or elsewhere. Was the very first written documentation of lifelong slavery being marked onto the black file. Soon after this, Virginia lawmakers and the lawmakers in other colonies started making these strategic laws where they would severely punish any European, whether frontiersman or indentured servant, for colluding or cooperating with black runaways or with Native Americans. They even gave them great rewards, land, muskets, money, for capturing runaway slaves and for killing defiant natives. Then came the one-drop rule. Anyone born with 1 drop of discernible African blood in them could automatically be considered a slave. So now, blackness became this marker for lifelong slavery from birth. Then, by the mid-18th century, blackness became a scientific fact. Yeah, the great Swedish scientist Carl Linnaeus, known as the father of taxonomy, he drafted this human taxonomy in Stemma Naturae back in 1753. Homo sapiens Europaeus. Vigorous, muscular, flowing blonde hair, blue eyes, very smart, innovative, wears tight clothing, ruled by law. Homo sapiens Asiaticus, stern, melancholy, black hair, dark eyes, greedy, contentious, wears loose clothing, ruled by opinion. Homo sapiens Americanus, ill-tempered, impassive, thick black hair, harsh face, beardless, contented, free, stubborn, paints red lines on his face, ruled by custom. And last but certainly least, Homo sapiens After, sluggish, lazy, black kinky hair, silky skin, flat nose, thick lips, careless, crafty, covered by grease, ruled by caprice. I am the darker brother. Okay, let me take you all to 1992. I'm in high school at Saddleback High School in Santa Ana, California, home of the mighty Roadrunners. And there I am in AP US History with one of my favorite teachers of all time, Mr. Rohn. Now, Mr. Rohn could tell a story like nobody's business. I mean, he could command an audience. He actually made me love US history. And I remember Mr. Rohn had something special because he had this glint in his eye. And he stood there in front of the class with his arms crossed and said, "Who was the first American to die in the American Revolution?" Now, nobody really knew the answer. One of the smarty pants is trying to guess the usual suspects. Paul Revere, Samuel Adams, Patrick Swayze, Patrick Henry. They were all wrong. And then I noticed Mr. Rohn looked at me, and he shoots me a quick wink before he says, "Crispus Attucks, Monday, March 5th, 1770, the Boston Massacre." I open my book, and I look through the pages and see a listing of 5 names. 5 martyrs, 5 great patriots who died for their country before it was even a country. Samuel Gray, Samuel Maverick, James Caldwell, Patrick Carr, and a mulatto man named Crispus Attucks. A man who looked more like me than any other historic picture I'd ever seen in the colonial times. My chest started to swell with pride. I mean, it wasn't even Black History Month, right? Bonus! And to this day, I am forever grateful to Mr. Rohn, who happened to be a middle-aged conservative white male, for introducing to me this triumphant picture of my ancestors, my African ancestors, as more than just slaves or servants. I would later learn that the picture I'd seen in my book was a drawing by William Chapman. And that picture, it depicts Crispus Attucks as a dark-skinned man out in the front fighting. He's the most prominent figure in that drawing. I later learned that that particular drawing was done by William Champney in 1855, and it was part of the abolitionist movement. So what William Champney was trying to do was trying to put a light of dignity on blackness. But then I learned that the original lithograph depicting the Boston Massacre was created by none other than Paul Revere himself back in 1770. And that particular lithograph exhibits a glaring omission of blackness. Let's say that. Everything on that thing is white except for maybe the red coats of the soldiers. And it hit me. As much as we try to be colorblind in this country, blackness has always mattered to different people at different times for different reasons. Like, for Paul Revere, blackness mattered enough for him to erase Crispus' clear African features from his lithograph. For William Champney, blackness mattered enough for him to make Crispus Attucks the focal point of that entire piece of art. And to a high school kid, 200 years later, Crispus Attucks' blackness certainly mattered to me. Now, before we get caught up in the nostalgia that is America's selective amnesia, let us recall that on that night, that crisp spring evening in Boston, Crispus Attucks was really just another runaway slave. Yeah, let's go back to 1723, when Crispus Attucks was born to a Native American mother of the Wampanoag tribe and a captive black father in the Framingham area of Massachusetts. Now we know that at some point in his 20s, Crispus must have run away, because a slaveholder named William Brown put an ad in a Boston newspaper looking for a Crispus Attucks. This guy was 6 foot 2 inches tall, knock-kneed, and had curly hair. Incidentally, the name Crispus is Latin for curly. Well, we know this runaway slave had to find a new career. So what did he do? He did like many runaway slaves in his time, especially in the New England area, he became a sailor. See, the life of a sailor was difficult and dangerous, but it kept you safe from slave captors. So Crispus, we learned, became a sailor and actually became a person who made ropes as well. He worked on whaling ships. On the night of his death, it is said that Crispus was coming back from the Bahamas and was on his way down to North Carolina for another sailing. Look, that night's events have been reported by many different people, from many different perspectives, but a few things we do know. Most of the Bostonian colonists hated the soldiers, the British soldiers. And there were two basic reasons why. Number one, British soldiers would undercut the labor market in Boston. They would work for less in the Bostonian colonies. Number two, when British soldiers saw a young man who was strapping and young and able-bodied, they'd often knock them over the head with a club and inscript them into the Royal Navy, legally. So these notions of foreign entities sneaking into our country and taking our jobs and human trafficking, not new to us. So we know that the Bostonians hated the British. We also know that on that particular night, there were 300 to 500 angry Bostonians throwing everything from snowballs to clamshells and shouting at the soldiers as the soldiers tried to fend them off. You bloody backs! Lobsters! Red coats! Fire, why don't you? Meanwhile, we know that somebody reported that Crispus Attucks stepped to the front of the crowd with his wooden club in hand and shouted, "Knock them over! Knock them over! Kill them! They dare not fire!" Now at this point, Captain Preston, the captain of the guard, tried to calm things down. "Stand off! Stand off! I presume no one desires to die this night." Now, at that point, a series of unfortunate events unfolds. Somebody throws a club or a rock or something at this Private Montgomery, who falls over. Someone shouts, "Damn you, fire!" At this, Crispus Attucks grabs the musket of one of the soldiers by the bayonet. The soldier fires. A hot musket ball lands in his chest.
We'll be done with the troubles of this world. The troubles of this world. The troubles of this world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of this world. I'm going home to live with God.
Crispus dies as a martyr, fighting for what has not even become a country yet. He is celebrated by Bostonians by and large. His body lays in state in Faneuil Hall for 3 days. The great patriot Samuel Adams throws a lavish funeral for him. They say that this black man lay in a casket while white Bostonians marched through the streets to celebrate this patriot. Then came the trial of the 8 soldiers. They were defended by none other than accomplished lawyer, soon to be second president of the United States, James Adams.
On Ross belonged to Benjamin Lundy, John Cushing, Peter Oliver, and Edmund Trowbridge, Esquires.
Attucks, with his myrmidons, comes round Johnson's corner, down to the party at the sentry box. Now, the soldiers pushed the people back, but this man, with his party, cries out, "Do not be afraid of them. They dare not fire. Kill them, knock them down," and tries to knock their brains out. Now it is plain that the soldiers did not leave their station. Now, to have a regiment, these people were commanded by a mulatto, stout mulatto, whose very look was enough to terrify any person. What had not the soldiers then to fear? After less than 3 hours, every one of those soldiers was acquitted for murder. John Adams was applauded for being a great lawyer and a diplomat, blind to his own biases. He taught us a lesson. Like the colonial court back in Virginia in 1640, John Adams had learned the power of weaponizing blackness for political and economic gain. Then, while in the throes of a revolutionary war, the 13 colonies sat down and drafted the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With those indelible words, the ideal of America was born. This notion of freedom and justice for all. It stood in stark contrast to the lived experiences of the black captives in that same country. But this lust for liberty, it was infectious, it was insatiable, it was indomitable. And it inspired black captives like the Reverend Denmark Vesey, who was one of the founders of Mother Emanuel. And also that plantation preacher turned rabble-rouser, Nat Turner, down in Southampton, Virginia. Men like this were fired up by faith. They were fueled by a ferocious appetite for freedom, and they were fascinated by Toussaint Louverture and his great slave revolt, which turned into a revolution against the French in Haiti back in 1791. By 1804, Haiti was the first and only country in the Western Hemisphere that was run, led, owned by black people who were captives before, who fought to make themselves free. By the mid-1800s, there were over 250 slave revolts or uprisings that happened across the United States of America. Every one struck fear into the hearts of white folks. Every revolt, every uprising, every riot was a threat to their way of life, their existence. But every one was a spark of hope to those held captive. Every revolt, every riot, every uprising, it was a potential revolution, a chance for freedom. Sadly, every one of those slave uprisings was crushed mercilessly. Denmark Vesey, for example, was killed on July 2nd, 1822. He was killed for inciting insurrection. Within days after his execution, Mother Emanuel was burned to the ground by angry, scared white people. Now this time was very difficult for our nation, and at this time, the world had to get a grip on what was happening in our country. It had to be reconciled. That the freedom that we celebrated stood in stark contrast to the captivity that was imposed upon black bodies. 30 years after Denmark Vesey's death, just days from our nation's independence, Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist and activist, was asked a very difficult question about a very complicated country. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I will answer. It is a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. I say this with a sad sense of the difference between us. I am not included within the pale, glorious anniversary. Your great independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. Soon, this tension between this notion of us, the United States, and this notion of them, the enslaved, the inhuman, well, it got to be unbearable. The moral millstone that slavery hung around the neck of this nation, it needed to be said. The great Scottish poet Thomas Campbell put it like this: United States, Your banner wears two emblems. One that it bears reminds us of your fame. Alas, the other reminds us of your shame. The white man's liberty in type signs blazoned by your stars. But what's the meaning of your stripes? They mean your Negro scars. And in this great nation, with this great promise of freedom for all, a breaking point happened. X marks the spot. Between our integrity and our economic interests, we had to rend and find a new way to begin. And so began the Civil War on April 12, 1861. Brother fighting against brother. This was the bloodiest war of America's history. Over 600,000 American bodies fell on American soil. 180,000 soldiers were black soldiers who literally fought for freedom in the Union Army. Paul Laurence Dunbar called them those noble sons of Ham, those gallant colored soldiers who fought for Uncle Sam. Well, soon President Abraham Lincoln put his money where his mouth was, and he issued the Emancipation Proclamation in September of 1862. It said that all slaves held by the Confederates would be then, thenceforth, and forever free by January 1st of 1863. That was a nice notion, but the Emancipation Proclamation didn't really do anything for the slaves that were held by Confederates because the war raged on for another 2.5 years. It wasn't until Wednesday, December 6th, 1865, that the 13th Amendment was passed, legally freeing all black people in this great country. Except for the fact that some slave owners on the East Coast got hip to the game and actually smuggled many of their slaves to Texas to escape the freedom train. Wasn't until 6 months later, on Friday, June 19, 1865, when Federal soldiers marched into Galveston, Texas, that all of America's captives were officially free. We call that Juneteenth. It's a day worth celebrating.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Freedom would come at a cost, however. See, while the 13th Amendment decreed that all people in America were free, it contended that anyone convicted of a crime may be forced to work for free. So now blackness became a marker for criminality and incarceration. These newly freed people had to confront newly created crimes like loitering, vagrancy, belligerence, indolence. It amazes me that people who live in a country that seems so hell-bent on breaking them down would somehow muster the strength to stand up for it at every turn. In every
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets rang the land, the bombs bursting and gave proof through the
Next comes that memorable era in American history known as the Reconstruction. Federal troops came down to the South to help the Confederates to rebuild and to reconnect with the rest of the country. Then we had these new amendments that came about. The 14th Amendment, it gave black folks true citizenship. By 1868, everyone born in this country was considered a naturalized citizen with all of the rights to liberty and life and property. Then, in 1870, comes the 15th Amendment, giving black men the right to vote for the first time ever. So for the first time ever, we actually have representatives and senators going to Washington, D.C. to represent their communities with black skin on. There were 15 congressmen that went to D.C. during the Reconstruction. 15 black men. They were representing the states of Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, North Carolina, Mississippi, Texas, and Virginia. The very first black senator, Hiram Revels, he was a preacher, a teacher, he was even a chaplain in the Union Army during the Civil War. He was selected to take the seat of one of the Confederate senators who had stepped down. So in 1870, Hiram Revels was ready to become the first black senator, but many of his colleagues in the Senate contested his election. They said that he had not been a senator or a citizen for long enough. Let me clarify. To be a U.S. senator, you must be a citizen for 9 years. A black person in America was not a legal citizen until the 14th Amendment passed in 1868. Which meant that Hiram Revels, a man who was born and raised in Fayetteville, North Carolina, who lived between North Carolina, Ohio, and Mississippi, working and living and building up his community, he was not technically a true citizen of this great nation. Well, thank God the Republicans won that debate, and it closed out with the Republican Senator Charles Sonny stating, "The time for argument is past. No more need to be said. For a long time, it has been clear that colored persons must be senators. All men are created equal, says the Great Declaration. And this great act gives verity to that truth. Today, we make the Declaration a reality." Now, Reconstruction was a wonderful time in our nation's history, but it could not last. The tension between black and white, between Republican and Democrat, between North and South, it pulled on the nation, and the Reconstruction could not withstand the pressure. It all came down to a big election, the election of 1876. It was between two presidential candidates, Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, and Samuel Tilden, the Democrat. Now, it was a very close race, and it came down to a few contested electoral votes in 3 different states: Louisiana, South Carolina, and say it with me, Florida, right? So these 3 states were confused. They didn't know how they were going to figure out who was going to be the president. So the Republicans got an idea. They sent down some of their best negotiators to the South, and they negotiated with the Dixiecrats. There would be a trade. If the Democrats would allow Rutherford B. Hayes to become the next president, a Republican, then the Republicans would pull the federal troops out of the South. Now, mind you, these federal troops were the only thing standing between a fledgling black citizenry and all of the reactive rage of suppressed white supremacy. The deal was made. It's called the famous or infamous Compromise of 1876. The Republicans won the presidency, and the South rose again with a vengeance. All of the hate and the fear that was in the white supremacists in the South, it rose up, and they created new laws, new policies and protocols that segregated white folks from black folks in every social setting, from the church house to the outhouse. They neglected and negated the 15th Amendment by eliminating all of the political power that black people had built in the South, with poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright threats. Yet, this was a time When black people were afraid for their lives, the senators and the congressmen were allowed to finish out their sentences or their times in Congress and soon sent home. The great representative, the last black representative, was from North Carolina, George Henry White. He left office in 1901. Then there was Blanche K. Bruce, the last black senator. He left office in 1881. We would not see another black face on the U.S. Senate floor for over 8 decades in 1976. The fear of blackness had overtaken a nation, not just the South, but the North as well. This notion of the fearful, ferocious black threat, the muscle-bound, mutineering mulatto, the black beast, the roving, rapacious Negro, the degenerate hordes of Ham's descendants descending upon a nation of wholesome white folks. These thoughts, they pervaded the press and the arts and common folklore. Then white folks knew that if the American dream was pure and good and true, then it had to be protected from the sooty hands of the colored man. See, if they wanted to protect the American dream, they had to make a fuss for fear of what the black folks might do to us. White nationalist groups started to rise up and spread across the land like a wildfire. The KKK, the White Knights, the red shirts. And then from southern soil sprouted up Confederate monument after Confederate monument after Confederate monument, reminding us of the great white man's stand against northern aggression and Negro contamination. Then the country came to a point where it was fit to explode. It was a powder keg, just waiting to blow up. And one spark lit it all. It was Wednesday, August 11, 1897, the year before Manuel McCauley was killed. And a little old lady, looked sweet enough, name was Rebecca Latimer Felton. She was a conservative pundit and activist, spoke to a crowd of the Georgia Agricultural Society. See, Mrs. Felton had done her research, and she learned that the greatest threat to white women in the rural South was a roving black rapist. If it takes lynching to protect a woman's dearest possession from the raving human beast, then I say lynch 1,000 times a week if necessary. Now, just exactly 1 week after this, there was a public response to this very offensive statement. But it was from a black man, an Alexander man. Yes, I said a black man. Remember the one drop? I know he was Italian. He's a black man by these standards. Now, this black man was the editor of the Daily Report, a black newspaper there. He was prominent, educated, and bold. So bold. On Wednesday, the 18th of August, 1897, Alexander Manning issues a public response to Mrs. Felton's concerns. Mrs. Felton, like so many other so-called Christians, loses sight of the basic principle of the religion of Christ and her plea for one class of people as against another. Our experience among poor whites in this country teaches us that women of that race are no more particular about clandestine meetings with colored men than are white men with colored women. Meetings of this kind go on for some time until the woman's infatuation or the man's boldness brings attention to them and the man is lynched for rape. Mrs. Felton must first address the fountainhead if she wishes to purify stream. Brother say, what? Y'all have to understand, this is a black man making a public statement to a white about sex between black men and white women in public in the 19th century. That was like playing Russian roulette with a loaded revolver. Alexander Manley wasn't the only black man in North Carolina living on the edge. Let's go back to Manly McCauley. Now, we don't know a lot about Manly McCauley, but we do know that he was 18 years old. So he was born in 1880. Born in the dawn of the spring, in early March. He was born to David and Luvina McCauley. He had 3 sisters. We also know that he was working, he had a job with Milton Brewer, a prominent corn farmer in the Orange County area, in the Bingham Township. He was born there in the Bingham Township, so he was a local boy, so to speak. We know that Milton Brewer was born shortly after the Civil War, but Manly McCauley was much younger. He didn't have any concept of Civil War, of oppression, of slavery. I imagine his elders talked to him about slavery in words that were so ethereal, it felt like a ghost story to him. Well, there's a third player here. It's Maggie Brewer, Milton's wife. She's a young woman in her late 20s who was strong-willed and very progressive. Maggie and Milton are both progressive Republicans. They have 3 kids, ages 10, 6, and 3, and the word is that their marriage is on the rocks. Now, let me bring you to the fall of that year of 1898. It is corn harvest season. So this thing that farmers do is called a corn shucking, right? They go to each other's farms and help each other to pull in the harvest and talk about life and religion and politics between nips of corn liquor and plates of barbecue. A good old-fashioned corn shucking. Another corn shucking, Milton? Yes, dear, another corn shucking. We are farmers. We are corn farmers. Why must you be so difficult, woman? What's difficult, Milton, is living in this house taking care of your 3 children with nothing to do and nowhere to go. Maggie, I work hard for you and those children to give you the lifestyle. Go, Milton, go to your damnable corn shucking. I'm going to Gabby's. Wait, Maggie, where are you going? I will not spend another night under your roof. Maggie! Manly, get in here. Yes, sir. Manly, were you listening to my conversation? No, sir, just packing up for the corn shucking. Well, eavesdropping or packing for the corn shucking. Either way, I'm sure you can tell Mrs. Brewer has had another one of her tantrums for which I do not have the patience. Okay, Manly, we're going to have to divide and conquer. Okay, I'll go to the corn shucking here in Bingham. You get some boys together, go to the corn shucking in Pittsburgh. And Manly, I need to get Brewer and the kids over to the Lloyd farm. Yes, sir. And Manly, I'm not an idiot. I know that Mrs. Brewer is taking advantage of your obedient audience to speak ill of me in our marriage. And while I normally see no harm in such hysterical banter, we do not have time for dilly-dallying. There's only so much daylight, man. I need you to expeditiously deliver her to the Lloyd farm and get to that corn shucking in Pittsburgh. Am I clear? Clear as rain, sir. Clear as rain. Now, later on that day, we learned that Thaddeus Lloyd, Maggie's father, observed that Manly and Maggie were having a quiet conversation by the front door at the Lloyd farm. Woman, is you crazy? Do you love me, Manly? Yeah, yes, I love you, Maggie. But you running off, us running off together? I don't see how nothing good can come of it. How can anything good come from us staying here, Manly? Can't you feel it, Manly? There's change in the air. Manly, take me away from here. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Manly, I hear we can go to Philadelphia. We can go to New York. And there's plenty of places where we can start a new life. We can go to Canada if we must. Manly, if you don't take me away from here, my love, I will go myself. Now you know I can't let you do that, Maggie. Then what about the children, huh? What you gonna do with the children? I'll leave them here with Daddy for a while. He can take care of them until we get things together. Maggie! Come on inside, darling. The children need you. Manly? No, Don't you have a corn shucking to go to? Yes, sir, Mr. Lord. I was just ensuring that everything was okay with Mrs. Brewer and the children. Nothing they need, I can't provide, ma'am. Go on. Yes, sir. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Lloyd. I'll make arrangements. I'll be back for you. Now, what happens next? Only Manly and Magna. On Wednesday, Milton Brewer went to a corn shop. Came home to learn the horrible truth. His wife had eloped. He immediately organized a posse, and the elopers were captured just beyond Jonesboro. Mandel! Mandel! Mandel, get out here! Get out here right now, Mandel! I want to see you eye to eye! Milton, what are you doing here? I will contend with you later, woman. I'm here as an employer of one Manly McCauley. Manly! I missed you at the corn shucking in Pittsburgh, Manly. Said you never went. Where you been, Manly? Manly, get out here! Mr. Brewer. Mr. Brewer. Shut your filthy mouth, nigger. Oh, you in for a world of hurt. Let us at him, Brewer. Let us at him. Hey, Walter. Really? Shut up. Manly. Oh, God. You're just a boy. But I treated you like a man, huh? I paid you well, Manly. I trusted you with my farm and my family. I treated you like a man, man to man. You know how I feel about that, Manly. Colored or white, a man is a man. You have no idea what you have done here, boy. Somebody take Maggie home. Jesse, Walter, Relby. Let's do this quickly. The Negroes in the section have to know the information about the whereabouts of Manly McCauley. They threaten that there'll be trouble if they don't learn. Turns out that a mob of masked men took the prisoner to a neighboring dogwood tree, bent it down. After tying to its bough a rope around McCauley's neck, turned it loose, jerking him into midair, breaking his neck instantly. The press at that time saw only one villain in all of this. A beautiful young woman, elopes with a rough, thick-lipped, impudent, repulsive Negro. A black, repulsive, grossly impertinent, reproachful Negro, and an imp of the devil. The body was found by Tom Mike. I was walking on a path through the woods, and there I seen his body was just swinging from a limb of a tree. The toes just touching the ground. And whoever done it, they knew what they were doing. That knot held them up there about 10 days, I reckon. The local press used this scandal as propaganda to embarrass the Republicans and raise up the white vote. Milton Brewer reaped what he sowed. Vote for the protection of your wives and your daughters. Vote for the love of your race. And it worked. That propaganda, it blew sails into the Democrats. Blew wind into the sails of the Democrats. And that year, in the election of 1898, the Democrats swept in local, state, and federal elections. Lost each other. But in a beach town called Wilmington, North Carolina, there were still several blacks and Republicans in charge of the city government until Thursday, the 10th of November, 1898, when a mob of angry white men, headed by a man last name Waddell, Alfred Moore Waddell, stood on the city steps and declared, "We will not tolerate this. No society can stand it. We intend to change it. If we have to choke the current of the Cape Fear River with Negro carcasses, we will." And they did. They burned down Alexander Manley's newspaper. They killed and ran off every prominent black person in Wilmington. They named Alfred Moore Waddell as the mayor of Wilmington. They kicked out all of the aldermen, all of the city leaders, and replaced them with Democrats. This was the first and only successful coup in American history. Meanwhile, 150 miles away, Alexander Manley's body dangled from a dogwood tree. In the wake of this darkness, this despair, a man named James Weldon Johnson wrote a poem of light, a poem of hope. It was called Lift Every Voice. It became
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling seas. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
James Weldon Johnson took that poem and worked with his brother Rosemont to write that song. That song became known as the Negro National Anthem. It's not that black folks wanted their own national anthem. It's just that when you live in a country that doesn't seem to want you back, when you're surrounded by people and policies and protocols that seem determined to break you down at every turn, you got to find some way to lift yourself up. To remind yourself that your life matters to somebody. In early January of 1900, the great journalist and activist Ida B. Wells addressed this great nation and its conflict of conscience around black lives. Our country's national crime is lynching. Our watchword has been the land of the free and the home of the brave. But brave men do not gather by thousands to torture and murder a single individual, so bound and gagged that he cannot even make feeble defense or resistance. Nor do brave men or women stand by and watch such things being done without compunction of conscience, or read about them without protest. Surely it is our nation's duty to correct its own evils. 14th, 1898, at a 2 p.m. trial, Milton Brewer, Jesse King, Rel Lord, and Walter Neville were tried for the murder of Manly McCauley. They were swiftly acquitted. Maggie returned home and had 2 more children with Milton. They went on to live an old life, had 15 grandchildren. They're buried today in Chapel Hill. Maggie died in 1957 at the age of 86. Milton died 3 years after her at the age of 94. He died just 11 days after some bold black college students staged a sit-in at a Woolworths counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, just 15 miles away. They only wanted the right to sit at the table to eat a meal with their white neighbors. They make me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. So, to come to our story, nowadays, if any one of us sees a noose or anything that looks like a noose hanging from a tree or a garage door, we instantly call out racism or hate crime. Our stomachs churn with righteous indignation. And that there's certainty in that indignation. There's safety in that indignation. But blackness, y'all, blackness is it's a slippery, sneaky spirit. It's sticky. It conforms to the contours of our conscience, and it's transformed itself into a marker for criminalization and poverty, crime, violence, frantic 911 calls, and stand your ground laws. See, we've come a long way from where we used to be. But blackness still haunts us today, not just in our history. Clementa C. Pinckney once said, across the South, we have a strong appreciation for history. We don't always have a deep appreciation for each other's history. Histories unreconciled become projectiles, tearing through flesh, refusing to mesh. On Sunday, February 23rd in 2020, young black man, just 25 years old, named Ahmaud Arbery, is jogging through a neighborhood called Santilla Shores in Brunswick, Georgia, a neighborhood that's not far from his own neighborhood. Now, as he's running, he takes an unauthorized foray into a construction site. I'm not sure why. He pops back out onto the road, and a man named Gregory McMichael, 64-year-old ex-police officer, and his son, 34-year-old Travis McMichael, spot Ahmaud's body running through that neighborhood. Now, incidentally, the name Ahmaud is Arabic. It means highly praised. And the name Travis means a toll road or crossroads in Old English. The name Gregory comes from the Latin Gregorius, means alert and watchful. So on this particular day, Gregory's alert and watchful eye captures Ahmaud Arbery's blackness out of place on that road, in that town, at that time of day. Everything praiseworthy about Ahmaud is cloaked by this blackness. And Ahmaud will have to pay a heavy toll at Travis's crossroad. Gregory has a .357 Magnum, and Travis has a shotgun. They follow Ahmaud, and Gregory calls 911.
911, what's the address emergency?
I'm out here at Santilla Shores. There's a black male running down the street.
Santilla, where at Santilla Shores?
I don't know what street we're on.
Ahmaud runs for his life, like John Punch, running for freedom. But he realizes that they're not going to let him go. They hem him up and they capture him. He realizes he's got to fight his way out of this thing. And with the same spitfire and rebellion as Crispus Attucks back in 1770, he tries to fight his way out, but The same mixture of fear and anxiety that must have taken over young Manley's heart when that noose was slid around his throat took over Ahmad's heart. And he realizes he's out of options. Travis jumps out of the vehicle with the shotgun, and Ahmad realizes it's time to fight. His fists fly, he grabs a hold of the shotgun. He shot once in the head, twice in the chest.
Soon we'll be done with the troubles of this world. The troubles of this world. The troubles of this world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of this world. I'm going home to be with God. No more weeping.
Ahmad's body lay in that street for hours as the investigators came to investigate the scene, and Travis and Gregory went home and slept in their beds that Sunday night. They were not arrested until over 2 months later, on May 7th. And the only reason they were arrested was because someone had a video of Ahmad's death, his lynching, and it became public. And so it was displayed and distributed through all of the major networks and all of the social media platforms for days. For days, his image, the image of his lynching, it was suspended in time and wrapped in replay. Like Manley's body suspended from the bough of that dogwood tree, his neck wrapped in a rope. For days and weeks we watched this man die. And then, as days and weeks passed, this image collapsed and collided and coalesced with new images of the now infamous curbside execution of George Floyd on Monday, May 25th, 2020, under the knee of Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, gasping for his life for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. We watched these men die, and now their names are arguably more famous than Christmas addicts. Their communities and their families celebrate them. People in the Black Lives Matter movement chant their names. Then there are those who prefer to focus on their criminal record, personal pedigrees, and interesting histories to justify the sacrifice of their bodies at the altar of law and order. Then there are some of us who prefer to forget that black lives like George's and Ahmad's ever existed. See, the difference between Boston and Brunswick, between Massachusetts and Minneapolis, between Chapel Hill and Charleston, is that as Americans, we have very fluid definitions of things. Riot, revolution, freedom fighter, terrorist. As Americans, we all understand that foreign occupation of our soil is tyranny. It is a threat to our national existence. But as Americans, only some of us understand that terrorism lives in racism, and racism is tyranny. It is a threat to our spiritual and bodily existence. You know what my 12-year-old son asked me when he saw the video of Ahmaud Arbery being lynched on the street? The same thing he asked me when he saw the video of George Floyd being lynched on the street. What did he do, Daddy? I don't know, son. But whatever he did, we're gonna make sure we don't ever do that, right? 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 Besides,
As
see how beautiful I am.
down in the valley to pray,
And they'll be ashamed.
about that
I too am American.
you shall wear a starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. By and by we'll all go down, all go down, all go down. By and by we'll all go down, down in the valley to pray. As I went down in the valley to pray, studying about that good old way, when you shall wear a starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. By and by we'll all go down, all go down, all go down. By and by we'll all go down, down in the valley to pray.
Thank you. I know everyone here is in our physical audience is taking a little bit of a risk to come here today, so thank you for boldly stepping into our space, the socially distanced space. For those of you who are with us online, we're going to have a few minutes here for question and answer. Hopefully you've got some thoughts you want to share. We don't have a lot of time, but let's start to dig into this and keep the conversation going. I want to thank the Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition, the Arts Council. I want to thank all of my team. You all know I love you. They were named earlier by Renee Price. Thank you very much for naming those. And I want to make sure Liz Grimes Dressler, because her husband, Charles Dressler, is a wonderful, wonderful individual as well. I want to just get ready to answer any questions that might be there. So Katie, I think you've got something for me?
Yeah, this is a question from a viewer on Facebook. And she would like to know, how do you think the great activists of our history would specifically respond to the current efforts to suppress voting rights and otherwise disenfranchise Black and brown people?
Yeah, I think that they would put their bodies on the line as they did in their time. And I think that because they had the context of actual clear-cut, unabashed, unfettered racism, they could see it and call it. I think today we have so many euphemisms, and we say, well, it's just, it's gerrymandering. We have these terms that people don't even understand, so they get confused, and we have lost some of the context because some folks who are here with us today don't remember that struggle. So I think that they would say, they would, like I'm doing in this piece, they would see the haunting dots as they connect and say, no, y'all did this a few decades ago, centuries ago, and I see the same thing happening in different ways. So I think that they hopefully would certainly recognize that we've come a long way in many ways, but some of these elements of limiting voting on, not having voting on Sundays or not having additional voting or limiting early voting, how does that help the democratic process? You can't justify that, but what I can do is trace that to poll taxes and to the repression and to the threats that happened to Black people after Reconstruction. So I think they would help us to connect the dots, and I think they would stand strong and vociferously out against those efforts. Thank you for that question, Facebook friend. It's Chris Dressler, right, Thomas? I've got so many Charles and Christopher. Thank you. They helped to put all this together. And I'm on my Todd stool. I got to give a shout out to Todd, our man with the plan. He created the stool for us, or painted it. So thank you, Todd. Got a young man here. I know him. You gonna ask a question? Oh, okay. Here you are. Thank you. That's my son Sterling, by the way. So I got to play him. I have to play Langston in the back as well.
Sonny, we have another question from Facebook. Let's see. I'm just going to read the whole comment. Thank you for bringing together so much into this performance. I learned history I didn't know, and your personal stories of you and your son are powerful. What is the impact for you of working with this difficult material? Does it bring healing and empowerment? Do you need to do self-care after your performance, and how is it involved?
People often ask me how I have the capacity to do this work, and I feel that performance, in this space of performance, whether you're a visual artist, a performing artist like myself, it can certainly be a place of healing. And I don't want to say catharsis, because in the sense of Brecht, I don't want to have a catharsis and walk away like, oh, I've had my experience, but I want people to be convicted and challenged. And so for me, I feel like I'm doing my part here. So that's why I can jump right into a talkback and I'm still right here with you, because this drives me. I look at those baby boys up there and I think about the voice of my wife, the first and last voice that you heard. So y'all make sure you give her an air high five and tell her how beautiful she sang today. Think about the people that I'm connected to and why this work matters. So I'm driven. Then I look up at the screen, I see people like Ida B. Wells and Frederick Douglass, and people like that little boy who's locked in. He looks like my nephew Joshua. I look at that picture and I think, you locked up and you destroyed the lives and lives of people are still being destroyed, and there's work to be done. So I leave it all on the stage, and that for me is not only empowering, but it certainly is a healing element. And I believe that this change we're looking for, social transformation, it is a process, not a product. So that helps to keep me inspired, because I'm not expecting everybody to just suddenly get it, suddenly change laws and protocols. But I think if we can just start to have these conversations and push and stretch, as we have over the years, right? Look what happened in Georgia with the presidential election this year. Regardless of your party, you have to realize that people rose up and made a difference in a place, in a way that they didn't think could be done. There's work to be done, and there are hearts that can be turned and empowered and lifted up. And I think that this work right here, shout out to Mike Wiley, I think he's watching right now, he's really inspired my work. Mitchell Capel, great storytellers. The work that they've done has inspired me and encouraged me to say, you know what, I want to keep performing this stuff. Not to dredge up history, but to empower us to imagine something better. Let's acknowledge what was there, and then let's deconstruct that and reconstruct something better. I'm not talking about a revolution and burning the whole place down, but I am talking about a revolution where rebuilding the place and holding on to some of that great stuff. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women and people are created equal. That's some beautiful stuff. Let's keep that, but let's live up to it, right? So yeah, I'm driven by that, and I have to give a shout out to my dad. I lost my dad this year on the fateful day of January 6th to COVID, and he was a great teacher and a great man, and he lives in me, and I thank him for driving me on. I know he's sitting up in the seats telling me how neat he thinks this is. He used to use the word neat a lot. That's neat, son. So I hope he thinks this is neat. That helps me.
I have a question. One of our YouTube watchers would say, if you could do one thing today, Sonny, to change our society, what would you recommend?
One thing today to change our society is to invest in communities who need it the most. We talk a lot about reparations, and I think there's a case for reparations, but it's so complicated, and there's so many different state and federal stipulations and statutes that it's going to be really difficult to make happen. I know some communities are doing it, but what if we every day, if we see people like somebody who cleans your hotel room, don't leave a hotel without leaving a tip. Leave something. Like, we always talk about, well, we got to have better rights. We got to have a livable wage. We got it. And then we sit back and look at Mitch McConnell, and we look at Lindsey Graham, and we look at, I'm saying Republicans, right? But you can look at Kamala, you look at the President Biden. Look, you do something. What if we today started redistributing our own wealth to people that we know who need it most? What if we invest in organizations like Fayetteville Urban Ministry, the Find a Friend program? I travel around the world and I perform at a pretty high level. It's just glory to God. I'm not trying to say that I'm all that, but I can demand a pretty high price. But I will always perform for the kids at Find a Friend who are majority black, but more importantly, majority low income, low wealth people who need encouragement. I will perform for them free every day, all day. And so we got to find ways to invest in communities who need it most. Instead of waiting for that 40 acres and a mule, let's take what we got and let's go to those who are most downtrodden, those who are marginalized and left out, and find ways to creatively not only invest in them, but build up philanthropy. Local philanthropy and institutional philanthropy that's going to constantly be funding and encouraging and lifting people up. So that's what I want people to do. I want people to go to Boomerang Youth Incorporated right here in Orange County and invest in them. My birthday was yesterday, and so if you go to Facebook and you want to friend me on Facebook, try to get $2,000 to help them. When a kid gets suspended from the schools in Chapel Hill and Orange County areas, that kid can go to Boomerang, get a snack, get love, get encouragement, get lifted up, get challenged to do better, certainly, but also not be disconnected. They're inspired, they're built up, and they're reconnected. That's the kind of stuff we got to invest in and stop waiting for teachers and politicians and pundits and preachers to do it. Let's do it now.
Yeah.
Hey, Sonny, it's CJ.
Hey, CJ, poet laureate.
It's such an honor to see the show.
It means a
you, brother. It means a lot from you. You're amazing.
Full of gratitude, full of gratitude. I'm particularly interested in your relationship to the South as an artist, like being not necessarily from the South, I already mentioned high school, like the West Coast, and what particularly, as an artist who's from the South and see a lot of people move here, and with our last year, a lot of people are like leaving those big city hubs and being like, I'm coming to buy a cheap house in the South. And so what is the sort of like responsibility that you hold? How do you think about as an artist, like being someone who's not from here, but also being a part of telling the story and the narrative of the rich history that is here in the South?
Thank you, proud son of the South, being yourself, in a good sense. Well, first of all, I'm a Southern Californian. But my wife's laughing. She is born and raised in Fayetteville. She's the primary reason why I stayed, because I was like, oh, it's worth staying in the South. This beautiful lady. But I will say, I fell in love with my wife first, then I fell in love with the South, because I had a reason to stay, and then I started paying attention and seeing that when people call you baby and honey and darling, they're not flirting with you. I love that. They're just saying that they see you. And I have to say this. I came to the South from Southern California thinking that I would instantly experience racism and I would instantly experience marginalization and the cold shoulder. And that happens here and there. But for me, by and large, I've had more people who don't look like me look at me and see me and say hello and check in with me than I had in California. We don't have time for each other in Southern California, right? But here's the thing. So I'm a transplant, and I learned to love this place and learn to love that this is fertile soil. The fact that we do stop and say, how y'all doing? Hello. It gives us time to have critical conversations with each other. If we do it right, we can move people's hearts and minds and have our own hearts and minds moved, right? So I love that about the South. We slow things down. As you all see, my speech impediment has not improved. I'm still going fast. But my heart and my mind are slowed down. I see people now more because I've learned that from my wife, from family, from living down here. But I also have to remember, CJ, that I do come from here. When you think about it, the overwhelming majority of African Americans in this country, if you look back and look at the records, they came from Virginia. They came from, because we were brought here to work mostly the crops in the South. Now there are some that are originally from the North, but when you look at my mom's side of the family, it's Virginia. If you go back to, there were generations in California, but it was Virginia, and my dad's side of the family, it was Louisiana and Texas. And so what happened was because Jim Crow and because it was so harsh, there was this mass exodus, right? And so August Wilson does a lot of beautiful work about how black people went up north and west, right? And he does a lot of the stories about blacks who went up to Pittsburgh, etc. And so many of the black folks who are in New York, in Philly, in California, etc., that's why you can still sometimes catch it. And I know it's a stereotype, but you can oftentimes tell if you're talking to a black person or not. We have common roots that started in the South. There are isms that our grandmas and grannies and big mamas and big papas taught us, and they carried down through the South, right? And so it's still my home in that sense. It's my heritage, my ancestral home. And I'm glad to be back. I had a friend of mine who told me recently, I was looking at this beautiful picture of the Great Exodus where black people were leaving the South during those times after Reconstruction. And there's this beautiful picture of a man holding, I think, a baby or a package in one hand, and he's pulling a mattress with his elderly mother or grandmother and just walking, literally walking north. I mean, that's how austere and that's how desperate they were. And so I feel like it's such a great honor to my ancestors to be walking back, coming back home and building up and retaking our rightful place, which is not above anyone, but it is humanity, and it is the celebration of art and voices that you lift up. So to be here and to be able to be a part of that system, or that process, to me is a chance to honor my ancestors, to take back some dignity that they lost when they had to drag themselves out. My native ancestors who went through the Trail of Tears, etc. I'm coming back home and staking the claim.
Sonny, we have one more question from Facebook, if we have time. Do you do any work with, or have you considered working with the police department to help them understand these patterns in society and break the cycle?
I have, and I hope to continue to do it and do more of it. One of my mentors, True Pettigrew, he's a founder of an organization called True Access, TRU. So if you just Google True Pettigrew, TRU is his first name, Pettigrew, Pettigrew, I believe. And he does some great work with a man named Tony Godwin, who's actually the interim police chief of Apex right now. And they've been doing some work around building communication and connection between communities. And they do this thing that they started in Cary a few years back. It's called, I think it's called Barbershop, Barbershop Sundays or Saturdays. It's the first Saturday of every month, so it's barbershop Saturday. It's rap sessions, barbershop rap sessions. And they come together, and these diverse communities have tough conversations with the police officers, and everybody comes and hangs out. It's not about, you know, calling them out or about lambasting them. It's about us just sitting down and having conversations. And it's amazing when you look at the testimonies of police officers, the barbers, black people, and all people in the community, there's this resounding sense of, wow, that wasn't so difficult, this relief. Like, you don't bite, we can talk. And they're making moves in that process toward, I've had people tell me, don't say reconciliation because we were never reconciled. So toward reckoning, right? But peaceful and gracious reckoning. And I will say this, True taught me that if you do this work, you must always be willing and ready to meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. And love them for whom they are, not who you want them to be. Then and only then can you lead them to where they need to go. And maybe you can be led to where you need to go and be enriched. So I have worked with state troopers. I've been very honored to do some equity and inclusion training with them using poetry and art. And I love it. The thing that I talked to a room full of about 40 salty state troopers who are 15 years and higher, right? And I'm a relatively young, at least I look young, black man. And there was mostly white people in the room. There might have been 2 or 3 black people. And they were looking at me like, another diversity, equity, and inclusion training? Okay, here we go. And I opened up with poetry. I opened up with James Patrick Kinney's poem about the cold within, and these walls started dropping. And I realized that when I started bringing poetry, it wasn't that I was sambo and dancing, I'm not talking about that. But I brought poetry that was meaningful, and then I connected it to the training, and I looked them in the eyes, and I asked them for their stories, and I wanted to hear what they thought and what they experienced. All of a sudden, we were all like, warming up to each other and having tough conversations, and I was saying some stuff that I thought might have offended them, and they were saying some stuff they thought might have offended me, but we were somehow family in the midst of that connective tissue of artistry and performance. So I just thought that was a wonderful thing. So yeah, please do bring me out. I would be glad to come to your trainings or to conversations amongst police officers and civilians. I do want to say shout out to the Raleigh PAC, the Raleigh Police Accountability Community Task Force, and Rolanda Bird, who is a mother of a son who was killed by a police officer in Raleigh, and she has taken on the lead of this organization trying to bring accountability to police officers and to drop that blue wall of silence. I love police officers. My grandfather was a police officer. My father was military police in the Marines. Love a cop, or whatever you want to be called, police officer, law officer. I'll call you whatever you want to be called. I love you. And you need to be held accountable, just like every good person does. I need to be held accountable. So let's do better at that. And so Rolanda Bird, after I did a performance of the talk, she actually motivated and inspired some white folks to come and join her, because she'd been going downtown to city council and trying to get the Raleigh Police Department to allow for some more civilian accountability, and they were not hearing her. And then she got a team of her team and then some other diverse people coming together, and then the city realized, oh, okay, there's some purse string power here. There's some people who vote here. Let us adjust. And just, I think it was last year, the city just started having real conversations about a civilian accountability board. That would not have happened if people hadn't kept coming and having these conversations and really coming together. It wasn't just white or black, it was together. So yeah, I think that work needs to be done in terms of training, but also in terms of working together to respectfully hold police officers accountable. We can exhale too. Thank you all for your loving witness tonight. You really encouraged me and helped me through. Yeah, it's a blessing to be able to do this work. I'll just challenge you as I challenge everyone when I speak to a group. Please commit yourself to engage with, invest in, and spend time and break bread with people who don't look like, live like, or love like you. Then go back to your groups, people who do look like, live like, and love like you, and tell them about the wonderful experience you had with those humans over there that are not the other, but rather humans. And then I want to challenge you to go out and do something to make a difference. Find people who are downtrodden, who are disrespected, who are marginalized. And don't be a savior. You can't be a savior, but what you can do is invest. Invest in good ground and watch the fruit of your labor, preferably anonymously. Watch the fruit of your labor move us toward justice, toward equity, toward, most importantly, love. God bless you. Thank you.